Hello and welcome to Picture Astrology. In this quick snap video, we will talk about placement of moon in the sign of Gemini. And as always, our emphasis will be to understand how this placement affect the practical life and what impacts you can see in your day-to-day life because of this placement of moon. And in general, we will see how this placement affect the personality from mental perspective, from physical and physiological perspective, and also what kind of physical ailments that moon in Gemini can indicate. And while doing that, we will also discover some of the very important and salient features which can help you understand and explore the sign of Gemini as well as moon in a very unique way. So let's see some of the very important practical characteristics of the sign of Gemini and understand how this affects the placement of moon. So first of all, Gemini is an airy sign. The element of Gemini is air, and the nature of this is dual, meaning it is not active like a sign of Aries and not it is fixed like the sign of Taurus. And one of the best way to understand the functioning of a Gemini sign is by looking at the human organ lung. And as you probably know that Gemini is said to be ruling over lungs as well. So if you see in lungs, air flows in when we breathe in, and then the same air from the same passage goes out. So there is breathe in, the inward motion, and then this breathe out from the same passage going out, and this motion continues. It's a continuous coming in and out, and that is one way of looking at dual motion. So it is not very decisive, going in a very decisive straight point, very much like Aries, nor it is just static full of inertia like Taurus. Now if you see, this activity or this pattern of activity closely resembles the way thought process or thinking works in a human system. It's like ruminating or contemplating about something. You think of arguments, counter arguments, pros and cons, positives and negatives, benefits and pitfalls. And after going through this repetitive process, you reach to a certain conclusion. So you can probably now see that dual signs, irrespective of the element they represent, dual signs are generally very conducive for mental activities as opposed to the physical labor. And no doubt Gemini is considered as the sign where mental activities begin in a person. So if you see, first two signs, the Aries and Taurus, Aries represents the birth of a person, and Taurus represents the immediate nourishment which is required for surviving that newborn entity. And after these two activities, the third sign shows the beginning of mental activities in an individual's life. So definitely this sign of Gemini, especially moon in Gemini, is closely related to a person with great interest in definitely mental activities, definitely in things like communication, and communication of any kind. It can be reading, writing, chit-chatting, talking, gossiping, making fun of others, grapevine. And if you extend it further, it would also mean, going to movies, listening to songs, reading novels, reading short stories especially, and all kind of such mental stimulation is something which moon in Gemini is generally very fond of. Now, as I said, the physical labor is generally not the biggest forte of a dual sign, as we just saw, especially with Gemini, because the lord of Gemini is Mercury. Mercury is the princely planet. It is a prince. It is a young prince, not the king and not the full-grown man. It is a young teenager where the physical aspects are still developing, and that again emphasizes that Gemini especially is great for multi-talented interest in many different cerebral activities. See, especially in the teenage, people want to do so many things. They are not content with just one deep, keen interest. And Mercury is that teenager boy or girl who would have such a varied interest. Now, another important aspect of Gemini in today's world is closely related to flirting. See, a strong Gemini sign gives the mental agility as well as young thinking, which is needed for, especially in today's world, makes a person, amusing, good with play of words, witty, and a very good flirt, especially if Mars and Venus are well placed in a chart. And this also relates to very important point that Gemini, apart from being the beginning or symbolizing the beginning of mental activities, it also symbolizes the beginning of external physical desires, because that is the sign which represents, that after the birth your senses are just developing and developing just enough, which shows the beginning or burgeoning desire in the person. Now let's quickly talk about the physique of a person who has strong moon in Gemini. And in this case, especially when Gemini has, or this placement of moon in Gemini is anyways related to the ascendant, or moon is stronger than ascendant. So typically Aries signs are known to give a lean body. If there is one element which find it extremely difficult to gain weight, that all belong to Aries sign, and especially the Gemini. It is by far the most difficult to gain weight kind of sign, and it gives a lean, long or tall physique. If you see the picture of Deepika Padukone, who is one of the very well-known actress in Hindi cinema, her physique typically represents an Gemini-dominated personality. And since we are talking about physique or physical features, all classics unanimously describe moon in Gemini to have some kind of wheatish complexion. And it is a placement which is associated with very good skin. But if there are especially aspect of malefic planets, especially something like Mars and Rahu together, then skin trouble as well as trouble with the lungs and the respiratory system is pretty common. And in many times strong affliction can also indicate problems like asthma and related blood pressure related kind of stuff. Now if we talk about professions or work life which is supported by this placement, by now it would probably have been very clear that this definitely shows some level of great mental activity, or things which involve cerebral activities more than physical activities are generally the favorite of moon in Gemini. So things like public speaking, things like reporter, news reader, editor, writer, films, music, a good collaborator, someone who enjoys bringing people together, communicating with people. And in today's world there are so many different professions which involve the qualities of moon in Gemini. So like if a person with a strong moon Gemini, even if they are in say police force or in army, they would probably have activities involved like being in intelligence department, collecting intelligence or information from others, or in some cases being related to avionics, airplanes. So profession generally is you probably know defined by 10th lord and 10th house along with the most powerful planet in your horoscope. But moon in Gemini will give you some flavor of the kind which we just discussed. Now one important thing with moon in Gemini is that these people generally have a shorter attention span. And if you just taking an example to bring home the point, that moon in Gemini would be more closely related with a witty article or a newspaper story or short stories book, rather than something say like a PhD thesis. So just if you see moon in Gemini, the temperament to work for exceedingly long period of time, put in a lot of hard work in it, which not just required mental ability but also a lot of physical capabilities also. Moon in Gemini generally doesn't provide that. For that to happen, for someone to do PhD, moon in Gemini needs to be supported by some other aspect within the horoscope. But what this moon in Gemini will definitely give, that it will give that keen and piercing intellect. But the perseverance level will be, about the short span which we talked about. But as you know, nowadays in this internet age, even this short span, or say like me making this video, is moon in Gemini. But me creating a book about moon in all the signs with examples collected over my personal life, my personal experiences with respect to looking at chart, etc., that kind of temperament needs support with moon in Gemini. Now I'm going to leave you with one very interesting aspect about dual signs. I described you how dual signs work in one way at the beginning of the horoscope, beginning of the video, but there is another way of looking at the dual signs which some of the books, especially Prashna or horary books, explain, and that is that the 30-degree span of a dual sign, they consider the first 15 degree to be the fixed sign related, and the next 15 degree they consider to be like an active sign, and the combined effect is known as dual sign. And this way of looking has a lot of implication when it comes to dual signs, and I'm just leaving you with this thought so that you can also ruminate, think, counter argument, basically do like a Gemini sign over this aspect, and share with me your thoughts in the comments. So thank you friends for being with me. I hope to see you again soon, and yes, I will explain more about this aspect also in some video soon. So thanks for watching and hope to see you again. Bye bye.